What's wrong?
We can put people in timeout.
Oh.
That's what's up.
Are we live?
I think so.
Oh. Have we been live?
No.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
Ah.
Possibly.
All right. Mom says we dilly-dally too much at the beginning.
Okay. Well, we can.
She's like, mine's been refreshed, and y'all are just talking, and I'm scared to death. Y'all are going to say something not realizing you're live.
Thanks, Ma.
Yay!
Morning, everybody. Let me do this. I don't know why it's never set to the right thing. All right, cool. Ready? Welcome to Books We've Never Read.
Except for those we have.
I'm Jason.
I'm Nicole.
And this is our last episode of Rosewater. Episode, I think, 51 of Books We've Never Read.
Yay!
Over the hump. We're halfway there.
Halfway.
I'm just kidding.
What happens at 100?
We go into the dome.
Yikes. Okay, so is the dome...
What?
We
have other things to do.
Anyways. Okay, so before we get started, please make sure that this is the episode that you really mean to be watching. We talk about the covered portion as if you have also read that portion as well. So, if you're with us live, hello, and we're glad to have you. And please participate in the little live chat box. And if you're joining us in the replay, please comment away in the comment section, because we love reliving the books. It's like the best part about the book club is that we just don't read and forget it. We like read and keep rereading and reliving it and learning new things about it. So you can also catch us on Goodreads at Books We Never Read, and you can also catch us on YouTube Music where we're podcasted, in case you don't want to see our faces.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people watching, like, as a podcast, it looks like.
It's hard to tell. It looks like it just mixes the data.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. I don't know. But it's there. So if you want it, it's there. So, yeah, like I said, this is covering chapters 23 through the end of Rosewater by Tade Thompson. So if you haven't read that far yet, you need to back it up and go into the playlist and find the appropriate section for where you are.
Mm-hmm. If you're also new, we have everything playlisted for you, so you can go find some old books that we have read that you might be interested in. Right now, Deception Point is real hot. I don't know why. You can go read it if you want to.
It was fine.
It was fine.
It was fine.
Yeah, it was. So, cool.
I think we thought it was less than fine while reading it, but hindsight made it fine. Like distance from it made it fine. Flanders Panel will never be fine.
Rip. All right.
As I slurp my coffee.
Also, because this is the last week of Rosewater, immediately after this, we're going to go live again, just because that's how we film things, so that we can put out our syllabus for our next book, which is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. It's a like a fantasy novel sort of situation.
So someone sent me a screenshot of the library wait list for that book, and it was ridiculous. There were like 10 copies, 30 people waiting on each copy. I mean, my numbers are way off, but it was 20 weeks before the book would be available.
Oh, no.
Now, I downloaded it from our library app, and it was fine. You know, there were plenty of copies, and I didn't have a wait. But, yikes. So, apparently, Fourth Wing is
very
hopping.
popular.
It's hopping. I've never heard of it.
It's in, like, the top 10 best-selling books, like, this week. And it's been out for a while. So, Peggy says 11 weeks to get it. Peggy, send us an email or something. We'll hook you up.
Indeed.
We'll get that book for you.
Indeed. Peggy says, so if you're new to what's our current book, Rosewater, and you haven't read the other sections of Rosewater, you won't miss much, because this section happened way later and also a decade or so earlier, and it's likely happening now.
Yeah. Look, let's go ahead and talk about it, right?
Yeah, who are we? Where are we?
So,
am I Chad or am I Caro? I don't know.
Number one, I loved this book. I really did. And I am not sad that we're not going to continue on right now, but I am going to read the other two. Mm-hmm. Whether we read them together or not, doesn't matter. I'm going to read the other two. I have, like, this thing about, like, absurdist literature. Like, I like Samuel Beckett. I like other things in that vein. And this is not that far off, right, for some of those sorts of things. Because it does conflict and move everything. One of our readers on the Goodreads app made the comment that like it just kind of falls off in the third act, and that is absolutely true. Unfortunately, the end of the book is worse than the beginning. I think it starts fine. In the middle is fairly strong, and then I want to go ahead and put this out there. I've been complaining that there's all these things that the author alludes to that like I want to know more about.
Yeah.
And then we go and we learn more about him, and I'm like, who cares? Like, why am I doing this right now?
Right.
And this is like one of those weird situations where I think less is more, and I think the mystery would have been better than some of those reveals. Like when we finally get to go to America, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. I don't know why we did that.
Mm-hmm.
When we find out that the girlfriend Amanat is a
S-45 agent.
S-45 agent, like who cares? There are other ways to have had that like possible betrayal moment for 4 or 5 pages with a different job, right? Like she could have been like an investigative reporter, and he could have been like, oh yeah, like there could have been all kinds of things that we could have done there. The whole like Lihad thing didn't go anywhere, really. I mean, a lot of things didn't go anywhere.
Okay, so where was Lihad?
So Lihad originally was like in the space between dimensions, right? It wasn't anywhere in particular.
Okay.
But now, in what is the present for our book, where Caro and Amanat are dating.
66, yeah.
Yes, it is sort of in the biodome.
With Melara and
No.
Alexander, or whoever that guy. That's not his name.
That's not his name. But
no.
It's Wormwood, right? Wormwood is the alien being or whatever,
Yeah.
but Melara is some other alien being.
Right, and they're kind of all vying for...
Well, and so part of me thinks that maybe Melara, he says there's all kinds of different things. There's different sorts of aliens. And we get this weird Wormwood memory where he's like on a spaceship and they wake him up to make sure he's viable before they chuck him down to Earth. And I wonder if his masters aren't the Molaras, right? And they saw what Wormwood was doing, and they don't want that, so they're going to kill them all off. He's still doing his job. They just don't want these sensitives running around because they could possibly derail these plans.
Huge childhood's end vibes.
Yes.
Once it all came together and you realized what all was going on, it's humans. The end result of this is humans will become something else.
Right.
Something more alien than not. And there was a couple of conversations that happened in the book where it was like, okay, what percentage are we now?
Yeah.
How much are we now?
Well, and what at one point Wormwood says, she says like, are you the alien or are you the otherworldly thing? And he says like, I've been here for 40 years. I've been here longer than you have.
Yeah.
So what does that even mean?
So that is one of the things I really enjoyed about this book in particular, and we talked about this last week, reading sci-fi from this region, and that's that we get sci-fi from their point of view, and so a lot of that had to do with colonization, and especially like in Nigeria, how they're split between 2 worlds now. The group of people that want things to go kind of back to how they were, more to their roots, and the group of people that want things to continue forward, once colonization is over. So you take a little of the old and keep a little of the new and move on. And so that comment of, well, I've been here longer than you have, when you have this colonization over time, that also becomes true, that the colonizers have been there longer than the non-colonizers, and so you have this conflict of allegiances in a way, and loyalty, and who is the native at this point, who really deserves to be here. And the question by the time it gets that long is, well, you both do. You were both born there. Or whatever. And that's such an interesting question. And that's what's so cool about literature, is it allows you in a kind of a safe space to think about these types of questions. And you can take that concept and you can apply it so much further. You can look at it with like the Israeli-Palestine thing. You can look at it with any kind of, you've infringed on this territory and this was our territory. It's not an easy black and white answer.
Well, what's also interesting is like, as an outsider looking in, oftentimes we'll say like like the term we would use, I suppose, is indigenous, right? Like the first ones there.
Right.
But you look at a space, and we as outsiders would be like, okay, y'all are the indigenous folks. Y'all have the right to be here or whatever. But as the people within it, they may see themselves as two different things.
Yeah.
And like we look at them, we're like, you all look alike.
You're all the same. Right.
There you go. And they're like, no, right? Those guys invaded us 500 years ago or whatever. And the truth is much more complicated. And how often do we look at things and we say, okay, well, those are the original people here, but really they destroyed the original people here, and something significantly more complicated is going on.
Right.
On top of that, and this just has to do with our love for nice, neat categories,
right,
and for everybody to belong in a certain thing, and that's just not true. But we do the same thing with species, right?
Yes.
And so I was reading something this week, and I don't remember what animal it was, but they were announcing that, like, through our conservation efforts, we have 100,000 bears or whatever, right, back in the wild, and we're doing everything we can to save bears. And I'm on board, right? Like, I don't want to, like, go destroy anything. But someday they will be a different thing, right? Like, someday. Like, what happens when they split apart? What happens when there's these bears and then these other bears? Which one are we saving? Like, what happens when the bears adapt to human society and so are therefore tainted by what we have done? Do we save those?
Right.
Even though it's a natural speciation sort of situation, and I kind of thought about that here, where the humans are becoming something else because of their environment, right? It is because of wormwood, but wormwood is part of their environment,
right?
Are we trying to save the original humans for why?
Right.
What's wrong with trying to save the new thing?
Right.
And we are constantly changing, and we have to be comfortable with that. But we absolutely hate that concept.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's this is a really fun direction for sci-fi to take. Sci-fi is a huge genre. There's lots of things that fit into sci-fi, and there's lots of literary arguments about what should be sci-fi, what shouldn't be sci-fi, and at what point is it something else or whatever. So in my research, I came across a website called omanana.com, and it is a hub. It's a online magazine for African science fiction.
Oh, cool.
And so there were some educational articles or literary criticism type articles on the website, as well as calls for essays and stories and all kinds of things. And so I super recommend you visit it. It's so neat. I have favorited it because I want to read some of the submissions. So when you're trying to figure out, like, okay, what is African sci-fi? When you're trying to, what is that genre and what does it really mean? There's a complication on the front end. The difference between literature written by Africans for Africans and literature written with somewhere in Africa as the backdrop, as some exotic place, and then how do total outsiders filter out what was something written by Africans for Africans, so that I can kind of have a peek into the world of where they're thinking and what they're writing for. And so that was kind of interesting to read about as well. And I'm sorry if this is boring, but this is like the English major in
this
me
is what
that's
we do.
Like all excited about
boring is what we do.
all finding out about this stuff. So sci-fi usually has lots of technology in it, but there's a Ghanaian writer named Jonathan Potts or Potsy, and he said that the widely optimistic view of technological progress underlying traditional science fiction simply doesn't resonate with much of the experience of the continent. They have had a bad experience with innovation and progress. It means death and destruction for them while their resources get taken from them. And
that's like the story of Lihad, right? Of the city that gets destroyed 3 times over.
Right.
Every time it's through some technology.
Right. Yeah. And so their sci-fi, and take that with a grain of salt. Africa is massive.
Yeah, that's the real first complication.
Right.
Can you even
You can't even just call something just African literature.
Right.
It's a massive place, and the peoples are so diverse.
Right.
And so please just take that with a grain of salt. Like, I understand that what I'm saying is so narrow,
Sure.
so insignificant, and like not encompassing
Yeah.
the important stuff. Okay, but there at sci-fi, it tends to focus on the social costs of progress. And that's really the lens through which they tackle sci-fi. And we saw that in this book. I thought that was just really interesting and very insightful to process what we've read. Like you said, with Li Sha, the place that got torn apart 3 times and kept reappearing. And we also see that with how much Caro hates the implants. He wants the most basic level. A little bit of that, like, black market obsession with old technology. You know, it'll have just like the flip phones and not the total connectedness to the Nimbus and all that stuff. A little bit of distrust of the Nimbus, a little bit of distrust of the internet, you know, like we saw all of that in there as well. But they also note on that website that that African writers or in African writing, they're noticing an emerging optimism. Africans are moving away from their justified suspicion and mistrust of large-scale innovation, and they are starting to kind of become more active in the sci-fi genre. It looks a little different from where they're coming from, but they are building this literary genre throughout the continent. And I had one more thing to say about it. I'm so sorry. I can't remember. There's also like the question with sci-fi, like, does the science come first or does the sci-fi come first? You know, like with Star Trek or with, I think it was Star Trek or it was Star Wars, one or the other, they had the automatic doors that existed in the sci-fi world before it existed in the real world. And then, and then it came about because then there's this, if you believe it, then you can create it kind of concept. And they said that, well, we're not seeing that coming out of Africa. There's no believing it and then creating it. But then someone else mentioned there's like a 15 to 20 year lag on that. You know, you've got to build up the creativity and the belief and the concepts before you can think like, oh, wait, we could really do that, you know?
I want to tag on to that one, and I hadn't thought about this, but there is an interesting situation. In the book, he mentions that there's like this other currency. Do you remember that part? There's this thing that's just like not money that people use to trade and do stuff. I can't remember what they call it, but it's basically almost a cryptocurrency.
Bitcoin.
But it's not quite Bitcoin, and it's a little more complicated than that. And I think he says it's like based on like social trust or something like that. Anyway,
Interesting.
Point being is I don't know about in Nigeria, but on the eastern side of Africa, it is very common in some of those countries for there to be a secondary market that's outside of government taxation and things like that, where they use cell phone minutes.
Oh, wow.
And they have this whole economy where everything is worth a certain number of minutes and everybody can trade their minutes. And like, how absolutely fascinating is that?
Yeah.
Like, because that is realistically more useful than gold, right?
Very valuable.
There's an actual value to it.
Yeah. And like if that's data minutes, or if that's data and not just minutes, like call minutes, then that's even more valuable. That's being able to pay your bills and have access to the world.
And I haven't kept up with it, but several years ago there were banks that were looking into making loans to people in cell phone minutes, and some various situations like that would be kind of interesting, right? Like what does that look like? And the point being is that we kind of see that crop up here with this alternative currency sort of thing. And before crypto, and like they were doing the cell phone minute thing before crypto ever was a concept. And so talk about kind of an interesting sort of innovation that did sort of begin there that maybe we wouldn't trace to that point, but it's true. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about something that's been noodling around in my brain.
Okay.
So, I have been trying to decide if Caro is our protagonist, who is our antagonist? Like, who was all the drama of this book? Who was it against? And while Malara is clearly the bad guy because she's killing sensitives or whatever, Malara just doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't matter. And nobody cares, including Caro, really, that Malara is doing this. It takes Wormwood to get involved and to kill her. We don't find out that sensitives are dying until halfway through the book.
More than halfway, I feel like, really.
I mean, it's a bizarre situation where and like I don't think Wormwood is the antagonist. I think I've decided that it's Caro. And I need to think about this a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think Caro is the hero. He is obviously, I think, an anti-hero. And I think that part of the
Mm-hmm.
reason that this book is a mess and that we get these little blips of things that never tie up and that never resolve, that don't matter, because we're being told this first person from Caro's point of view, and he does not care about anything.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to go home and not have these powers, and he wants to be normal. And it's very common, in science fiction and fantasy for there to be this call to adventure, like the reluctant hero.
Mm-hmm.
Bilbo is a reluctant
Mm-hmm.
hero. Frodo is a reluctant hero. All the characters in Wheel of Time, reluctant heroes. Caro doesn't ever answer the call to
Right.
adventure. He is the reluctant hero that tried to stay home. That Gandalf was like, "No, you're coming," chained him up and took him. Right, like that's kind of like how
Mm-hmm.
this would happen. Um, but I think, in a weird way, Caro is his own biggest enemy. He is the one that is keeping himself back from being able to do something that would help the world, that would protect other sensitives, that would benefit people, because he does not care. He is inherently selfish, has never been not selfish, um, and he is uninterested. And I think that goes to explain why the book is so strange and choppy, and we do get
Mm-hmm.
these things that aren't fully fleshed out.
There's another very famous book that is strange and kind of choppy and has an anti-hero
Mm-hmm.
in a confused protagonist-antagonist situation.
Mm-hmm.
1984.
Okay. Yep.
Winston is not a hero
Mm-hmm.
at
Sure.
all.
Yeah.
He's a coward.
Mm-hmm.
He's not trying to fight the system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't call... He's the main character,
Yeah.
but that's it. But you're following the story and learning about the world and
Yeah.
and just kind of watching him fumble through
Yeah.
the stuff, and then by the end get sucked into the system.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we'll see with Caro as well, right? Like,
Yeah. I want to. I'm like watching the comments kind of as we're talking, and,
Yeah.
and Peggy just said something. We'll get to the rest of the comments later. But Peggy says, apathy is the antagonist. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Maybe it's not Caro specifically, but like it is humanity. It is the
Mhm.
human condition that is the enemy in this story. It is our unwillingness to go out beyond our own borders and to try to discover something new. It's the love of comfort and just to be left alone.
that totally makes sense.
And it's a disinterest,
Mm-hmm.
And, well, if I don't go find out, and we have so many cases where Caro could go do something and then chooses not to. There's this scene where these boys are like kicking a reanimate who's like stuck in the
and he's
gutter
like,
or something. He's like, ah.
The
And we just see
social
it over and
cost
over and over
of
again.
progress.
Yeah, is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's a book name. I think that's a book name.
The social cost of progress.
Mhm.
Well, no, but I mean that's what
Yeah.
African sci-fi tends to focus on.
Yeah, yeah.
And our loss of humanity
Mm-hmm.
is a concern as we progress technologically.
And I'll point out that even with the dog, he has this dog that he theoretically loves on some level that's infested with maggots, and he doesn't do anything about it until it provides him a cover story,
Mhm.
And but yeah, it's the self as the enemy, and nothing. Even though Malara is probably the enemy because she's trying to kill him, I don't think he cares that she's trying to kill him. I think, in fact, he at one point is like, yeah, okay, like let's do this. He doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so apathy as the enemy, I think. I'll think about it.
Well, and it's interesting that Malara used, certain human weaknesses
Mhm.
to kill the sensitive. So
Mhm.
for Clement, it was, I don't know what, jealousy or
Yeah,
whatever. And
yeah.
for Bola, it was love. And for Caro, it was lust, using their own vices against
What if
them.
it's like a seven deadly sins situation? I wonder
Yeah.
what Bola's would have been. But yeah, sure. The whole Clement thing was, again, one of those storylines where, like, I don't know why that happened to me. But it happened to me because it happened to Caro, and it doesn't have a reason, and it isn't going
Yeah,
anywhere.
why was there that whole scene where the goo came out of him, the ectoplasm came out of him and killed
Yeah, I
Clement.
love the whole ectoplasm thing. So
That was
then I
so
started.
weird.
I'm still not 100%. So somehow the ectoplasm is Malara, right? Like that is
Hmm. Okay.
somehow her. Um, it's not exactly clear what that means,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just some other alien fungus situation or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I also thought for a while that maybe the ectoplasm was this clone thing, this
Mm-hmm.
clone goo, but that does not seem to be the case. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And then the whole clone,
Con-
what's
so
happening to me?
very
Yeah, it
confusing.
was confusing. You want to catch up on some comments real quick?
Shall we? Okay, let's see.
Let's just pick out ones we can discuss.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm so distracted by all the comments.
Yeah.
And very entertained. Okay, so let's see. Shelby says the best part about the end of the book was the painting on the last page. I would need so many more visuals to really understand everything. Was there a painting on the
I
last
don't remember the
page?
painting. I actually tried to look it up a second ago while you were talking.
Oh, okay. And then Peggy says, I think Malara is just a sec within the biodome, just like Anthony is. Malara just decided humans aren't worth it.
That's certainly possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. It may not be a master. It may not even be anything at all.
Right. Yeah. It's just lots of different organisms vying for their right to survive.
I mean, the floaters are apparently some sort of.
I could have gone my whole life without those floaters. I just see the Harkonnens just floating and sucking on people. Peggy says we don't save them. We live with them, and they get jobs with the park rangers and make better oatmeal for the church potluck.
She's talking about the bears evolving.
Yeah. Let's see. Shelby would be open to reading sci-fi from Ghana since she spent time there. It'd be interesting to see if she liked it or found it like easier to enjoy because she understood some of the concepts behind it. And Peggy, about the whole like, does sci-fi come first or does the innovation come first? Like the scientific advance come first? Peggy says sci-fi would have to come first because we have ideas and we want to realize those things.
Sure. It may not be literature, but it's science fiction in somebody's mind. You know, what if we did whatever? Sure.
Right. And then as far as like different forms of currency, you know, like in the U.S., people sell food stamps and, you know, anything's currency if it has value behind it. So.
So and then Peggy says again that we see it throughout the book how we aren't learning what we should. How many times have we been told about something too good to be true? Hurry up and go get healed by an alien and trust it.
No, I don't. Oh, okay. So this book was really good at just blasting horrific images in my mind that I'll never let go of.
Oh, okay.
And like the little parade of the healed.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Like if this ever becomes a show, I don't know if I can watch it.
I think it would make great TV. I think we're finally to that point.
I don't need to see it.
But again, you know, talking about the full of distrust and promises that are too good to be true. I mean, going back to that sort of colonization narrative, which is not something that I think is unique to sci-fi from Africa. It is something that is in all of sci-fi.
Right.
Because sci-fi is in most cases about colonization of some kind.
It just hits a little harder.
It does
coming
hit a little
from
harder.
a place.
But yeah, so go get trusted and like this is gonna work out. But I don't know, man. Like we've been here before, so yeah, it's very interesting.
And I don't know what part of the book this was, what timeline it was. I don't know. But someone who was getting like amped up to fight some aliens was like, "We done this before," you know, like it's nothing.
Yeah,
we've dealt with colonizers.
I think what's really cool about this book to me is it's almost a book about a normal person who lived through extraordinary things. And he's not quite normal, right? Obviously, he's got some extraordinary things going on. But, you know, part of me is tired of Harry Potters. You know, part of me is tired of chosen ones. And Caro is not a chosen one.
Right.
He is an accident of nature on some level. And he doesn't want it, and he is doing everything he can to be a normal person. And even though Harry might be that, at the beginning, he embraces his nature. you know, and becomes the thing to save the world. And maybe Caro does that in these other books, but in this one he does not. And I really like books that are just about normal people in weird situations. And I think this was so attractive to me.
Yeah. That's like the series The Magicians.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that main character in the first book, he's just wretched, you know, and he's not answering his call and all that, but eventually he does.
Yeah. But that is the call to adventure, right? You're supposed to have these heroes who maybe they don't want to, maybe it's uncomfortable, but they step up. What happens when they don't, right? Like, what happens when Harry Potter just doesn't go to Hogwarts and lives like a normal life, but stuff explodes sometimes because he has these powers that he can't control, but he's an accountant, and, you know.
That's why I need to watch Fantastic Beasts. That's what happens with that little guy that turns into the dust cloud.
Oh, really?
That's what happens when you don't embrace your
gotcha.
magical,
Yeah.
you don't have an outlet for your magical powers.
But that is Caro.
Anyway.
He's trying to have like a bank job and just do his thing. So.
Sucks that since all the sensitives are destroyed, his bank job's over.
Yeah.
No one left to fight against.
So now he's the last one.
Yeah.
As best we can tell. And that does make him unique. And I'm told that the other books introduce other characters and maybe follow other lines and not necessarily about him. But like in some way that does now make him a hero. Right?
He's the last one, except Amanat's brother said, like, I see the same things on you that I have on me.
Yeah.
Can't you fly and burn too?
Yeah.
And so it's that evolution. It's you just can't quite recognize what the next thing is, even though it's very similar to what you are.
Can we talk about what's up with that boy? Right? Like, again, one of these things that was like, that was cool. Where is it going?
So somehow another species is able to reproduce with humans.
Or something. Yes.
An alien species reproduced with Amanat's mom.
You know, and part of me wondered if that wasn't like a Molara thing again, you know. Maybe, but it appeared to her differently than it would to Caro. Yeah, I don't know. The other part of me thought, like, what if it was like a floater? And like that's horrifying, but like those are the options that we have, you know. So, yeah, and again, this is one of those things where I feel like everything must go somewhere, and why put something in a book unless it has a point? And I think that's something. I think that is a part of me that has been like ruined. Not everything has to have a point, and not everything has to be resolved.
Didn't we watch a show that was a billboard in the show?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, man, what was that? But like and Greg and I have mentioned this several times now. But like I think Lost did that to me because everything in Lost had a point.
Oh.
And like you couldn't just enjoy it. You had to be figuring out what the mystery was. And whether or not you've seen Lost, I think it was a really important moment in American television, at least, where it really spawned something and changed the way that we do multi-season dramas and have like these breadcrumbs hidden without, because it was one of the first TV shows that really, I think, played on grabbing attention and brought some interesting techniques to getting people to continue on for the purposes of ads or whatever, right? But we've now come to expect that. And
I've only ever seen one episode of Lost.
Well, but we just don't think anymore that like, well, what if this is just a story about some people stuck on an island? It's got to be something bigger than that, right? And I am always chasing that. And I enjoy when I get a book that doesn't give me that, because so much does, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and I would say like even in Harry Potter, right, which was like a post-Lost thing. You have the first book. You have, you know, there's a Dark Lord. You know all this stuff, but there is no hint that the end of the thing, like you're just reading a book about a kid goes to magic school, right? Like that's kind of what you have, and then by the end of it, it's this whole thing, and you've had to follow these breadcrumbs throughout that you didn't even know were there, and that's very much in the same line. I've never read Harry Potter. I'm talking from a place of ignorance.
I have to call him out on it sometimes. I'm like, well, you just took that from the movie, and that's not how it actually happened in the book.
That's fair.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Shelby says, I know way more about anatomy now after having Googled so many terms from that paragraph about Anthony. There was a lot of things about anatomy in middle things.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot.
So
That's why I was like, I don't want to read a romance next because I've already heard enough about
part of me was thinking,
some middle
like,
stuff.
what is the spiciness level of this compared to Well Met?
This was way spicier
Yeah,
in like
sure.
odd ways.
Yeah. Well, and then part of me also comes back to early on in this club, and I don't remember what book it was, but I kind of made a complaint that I think that sex is too often left out when I think it should be included because it's a normal
It's
part
like a
of life.
basic
And,
human function.
And I think people just stay away from it because they're afraid of having to write it or
And it's
because,
awkward, and it would
because it's
it would
awkward.
zone them out of certain audiences. And...
But this dude just didn't care and was just like, I'm sticking it everywhere. And so then while I was reading this, I was thinking about how I had said, like, I think science fiction fantasy should have more sex in it. And then I was like, maybe we should have less.
But I mean, he woke up and there was always something going on. He woke up and he wet himself. He woke up and there was something else going on. It's like,
always something.
Whatever. You know. At least he was honest about it.
Yeah.
I mean, and so, I mean, we're saying like, like it's just too much. But also, like, you can't go through those experiences and not have some kind of physical response to that stimuli, you know? And so that's very realistic. And that was one of the comments that I wrote down in my notebook that I liked about this book is the things that happen in your mind are real.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily physically happening, but whatever is happening in your mind is a real thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we're getting better at recognizing how powerful that is, that, you know, mental scars are scars, and those are very hard to heal and very easy to hide, but, you know, those things have to be addressed. And, you know, it's just a powerful thing. And I think the author being a psychiatrist or psychologist, whichever one, probably is why he focused so much on that.
Well, because of his background, part of me wants to think long and hard and then put out another video about like the Freudian meaning of all this sex and stuff in this book. And I'm not sure what it is yet, but like I want to come up with one. And I'm not saying that there is one, but I can come up with
You can make something out of anything.
right? Like I can do that.
That's the whole fun of like literary criticism is you can make something out of anything.
But, you know, I mean, you know, if I don't know, like if sex is an act of creation, and then what is Wormwood doing? Like, is that like creation is the point of this story, right?
Yeah.
It's about the becoming of something new. In the same way that
Childhood Zen.
Childhood Zen. In the same way that Childhood Zen, there was so much that I thought about with Childhood Zen here about you know with the people becoming something different, and that looked scary to those who were left behind, but there was a lot there, very similar.
Yeah. Let's see.
So Peggy lived in Nigeria, and so part of me also thinks like, what if just the sexual experience in Nigeria is significantly different from that in America? You know, obviously that would be able to explain some of this. You know, like what if you know she says she saw more naked people in Nigeria than anywhere else? You know, I think that's also probably likely. Like if there's a difference in sexual culture. Then it would not be surprising to anyone that it was this prolific.
Yeah, so for anyone who is, you know, just like listening to the podcast version of the show, I do recommend if you have time popping into the video just to catch up on the chat. Like there's some good stuff going on in there, and we just can't get to all of it, but it's good stuff.
All told, I'm really glad we read it. Greg, this one's for you. So I was going to write to you last night on Goodreads, and then just decided I'd put it out here for everybody to enjoy. There's this conversation that Caro has about how whenever somebody recommends a partner to you, what they're really doing is making a comment on like who you are, you know. And so, and we had that conversation about, well, what do we say about each other, right? I think also that when you recommend a book to someone, that you are making a comment on who they are. And I don't know who I'm supposed to recommend this book to.
Keep it to yourself.
If I sit down and I say like, hey, I think you're gonna love Rosewater. Like, hey, you're kind of psychotic, and you're a little unhinged and not really connected to reality, you're going to love this book, right? Like, I just don't know what I'm supposed to say. But so I'm going to come up with some ideas about what each of our books says about people, and I'll put it out there.
Very funny.
So
Very funny.
I thought you would enjoy that.
Yeah.
Everybody might enjoy that.
Crazy, crazy. Shelby says, gasp, never read HP.
Yeah. Look, so there's, I've never read that. There's another, oh yeah. So in our short where we announced the next book, I referenced Hunger Games, which I also have not read. What's really interesting about the next book we're reading is it's sort of like, it's considered young adult fantasy, which the more I think about it is sort of a genre that I have skipped. I read Aragon. I wrote the author of Aragon, and he wrote me back.
Oh,
I
yeah,
still have
I've
it somewhere.
seen that, yeah.
But like off the top of my head, that is the only thing that I would consider as like truly within that genre. And obviously there are other things I've read. Like I've read all of Wheel of Time, but I don't think that qualifies. It's like I skipped the young adult part and went to the middle-aged part, right? Like Wheel of Time is very complicated, and it's not really meant for, you know, what young adult fiction is generally considered. You know, and or like Ender's Game, even though it's about young adults or about children, it's not really for kids or for young adults. But it's not usually considered part of that genre. But even though perhaps it should be, but like all the things that fit, I somehow missed. I just didn't read them, so I'm real excited about this one. Never read Divergent. Saw the show.
I've never read Divergent either.
Yeah.
I read Hunger Games way late. Like,
yeah,
pretty much after all three of the
yeah.
original movies had come out, I finally read them.
Yeah. So, for whatever reason, I missed.
You know, I mentioned that with this book, the current book, Rosewater, I was worried that this was really just supposed to be one book and it was split into three.
Mm-hmm.
That is how I felt about Hunger Games.
Oh, sure.
I was like, this is really just one book. Why is it split into three?
Right. Well,
they're very short. You could read them in a day. I mean, like, it was nothing.
The idea of a trilogy is almost like a fantasy sci-fi meta trope, right? Like there are tropes of fantasy where you have the call to adventure, you have a wizard, you have, you have this overarching evil bad guy, right? Like you have these things that are just supposed to go in these fantasy things. And then you have this other trope that is also the story is supposed to be broken into three parts. And that is something that comes from Tolkien, right? He did a trilogy. Now everybody does trilogies.
That's because those were really long.
Yeah.
And
but
like,
you know it's real fantasy if there's
it's a
three
trilogy.
of them.
Yeah. I don't know. Let's see. Ready Player One was I watched the movie, but I'd never heard of it.
Yeah,
like before you told me about the movie, and then Peggy's having mushrooms in her dinner tonight. Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been eating mushrooms all week.
Yeah, we have.
With our dinners, yeah.
Well, I guess let's go ahead and wrap this up. I know that we're missing things. There was so much.
I feel like we didn't even really talk about what happened in the third part. Like,
well, but that's okay because we've talked about like the themes and that's sort of our thing, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to discuss. We could talk more about Bicycle Girl. We could talk more about.
Well,
what's
yeah,
going
I
on
do
in
have a
America.
couple of questions.
Well, let's do it.
Okay. Well, so, you know, there was at some point in one of the timelines, Oyenda was like, "Stay with me."
Yes.
And then he was like, "Ooh, but I might could hook up with Femi one day."
Yeah, that was in 55.
Was anybody at any time rooting for Kara to end up with anybody?
No. So let me tell you about dudes. let me tell you about dudes, right? Dudes are eternally hopeful. Just eternally hopeful. And they will think, and this is something that because of the work I do that I watch in myself, and but also I think I've like figured that part out, like, but I watch in other people. If a nice lady says hello to you, or brushes your hand when she hands you change out of the drive-through window, or bumps into your grocery cart when you are shopping, or whatever, maybe I have a chance.
Oh God,
that is a thing, right? And it is easy to explain biologically, but it's also gross when acted upon, right? Like
right.
It's not something that I think is intended, and I also don't think it's something that's cultural. I think it is dude biology, right? And most people don't act on it, but some do, right? And that's what Caro's doing here, right? He is doing the thing where he says, Femi talked to me. Maybe I have a chance, you know?
That really threw me for a loop. At some point, he was like, he had said something about it, and I was like, oh, was that supposed to be like sensing some kind of, you know, tension between Femi and Caro, and like hoping something would happen? I did not sense it. I was blind to it.
Well, and I'll, you know, this is, I feel like it was somehow related to this book, but maybe not. But like, it really bugs me. I think that like when dudes just like lie in wait for like they have a woman friend and they're just waiting for her to have a moment of weakness so they can have their shot. Like that's a thing guys do, and so also things that guys are taught from movies, right? There are so many movies where if you're just a nice guy and you wait long enough, you'll have your chance. And Caro is kind of playing into that, which is predatory. You know, like it is a weird thing to do. But that's sort of his move right there.
Which is why Malara was almost able to get him.
So I'll have to think about this some more also, but it's very, like when I say predatory, it's almost like a spider, right? Like it waiting for something to fall into its web.
Yeah.
Grabs the thing. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. That was my big question, because every time I read something about him having high hopes for a lady, I was like, wait a minute, where did that come from? So yeah, it was confusing.
It's
just horny young man.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But now if you did not know that this thing existed, now that you know it existed, you will see it. Like you will see it happen in your life around you, and just be like, oh, okay, well that's weird, you know. But it's a thing.
All right. Well, that was Rosewater by Tade Thompson. We may or may not, as a club, read the rest. Probably not.
I'll report back.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I am interested in knowing like where the series goes.
Yeah.
You know, the next one is Rosewater Insurrection or something like that. And then I don't remember what the last one is. But I mean, I am interested. This was a visually engaging novel. It was like interestingly told, with the exception of like the storylines going back and forth, like the timelines, that was difficult.
Yeah.
But the narration style was very easy to read and enjoyable and all that. Yeah. So
I mean, honestly, all told, I'd probably give it 4 or 5 stars. Maybe not 5, maybe 4, but I'm not going lower than 4. I really did enjoy this. But it hits all the right buttons for me. I get why other people may not be so enthused.
Yeah.
But I'm also, talk about things that are eternally hopeful. I'm just happy, and I love reading books. And even when we read Deception Point and when we read Flanders Panel, I was having a blast.
That's what our book club shirt needs to say. I'm just happy and I like reading books.
I mean, but I'm also like that with movies. Like you can put on a terrible movie and I'm like,
I was entertained for 90 minutes.
I can't remember the last time I started a book or a movie and it was just like, nah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Next week we'll have our first week of discussion on Fourth Wing by
by Rebecca Yarros.
There you go.
And the syllabus will be out momentarily.
Yeah, we'll do that next.
So we'll see you then.
Peggy said she'd buy a shirt that I like. What is it? I'm happy and I like reading books, whatever it was.
Eventually, once we've been doing this long enough, we'll make a shirt of all the depressing things that I have said about human nature.
Oh gosh, I don't want a depressing shirt. I want a happy shirt.
All right, well, we'll let you guys go. Thank you for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. And we will see you next week.
Fun.
This was fun. Bye.
Bye.